Chapter 3 King at Last. Arthur had a lot to do during his first year as king. Establishing peace in a war-torn country was his main task, but he had also to appoint counselors to form a court. The year passed quickly when it was nearly Pentecost, the anniversary of Arthur's coronation. The new king decided to turn his attention to his fiercest enemies, who resided in Wales to the north and west. He rode west with his counselors and knights to a castle at Caerleon, which is on the river Usk. When they arrived, he called for a tournament to celebrate the feast of Pentecost and the anniversary of his coronation. Reports from the country outside of Caerleon came flooding in. 6 kings were leading hundreds of knights toward Caerleon. All of the knights had pledged themselves to Arthur's service, so he was not worried. In fact, he sent the kings gifts. Meanwhile, Arthur soon continued to plan the celebration. Soon, his messengers returned with the gifts. They told Arthur that the kings had refused the gifts and were marching to Caerleon to attack. So Arthur took hundreds of his own knights to a tower stronghold and prepared for a long battle. The battle raged on both sides, but the rebellious kings and their forces were weakened, and there was no sign that Arthur could be defeated. On the 15th day of the siege, Merlin appeared to the kings. "Tell us why this boy cannot be beaten," one of the kings said to Merlin. Merlin told them the story of how Arthur was conceived. He warned them that if they defied Arthur, they would suffer. Arthur's destiny was sealed, he said, and nothing could change it. None of them liked this answer, but they did agree to meet with Arthur. They were tired, and many of their own knights had gone to Arthur's side. They hoped to buy some time in order to plan their next move. Arthur, and his chief counselors, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the kings and their counselors attended. Before leaving, Merlin had advised Arthur not to agree to any of the king's demands, so the kings became more angry and left. Arthur took his forces back to their stronghold, and the fighting resumed. Just when it seemed that Arthur's victory was assured, he was attacked from behind. Arthur fell off his horse, while some of his knights held off the attackers. Arthur felt for his sword, the one that came from the stone. Here is King Arthur and the Archbishop. Merlin had told Arthur not to use it unless his life was in danger. Arthur sprang to his feet, showing off the sword. He cut down every enemy in his path and put an end to the siege. Triumphantly, he returned to his court, ready to vanquish all of his enemies throughout the country. He called his advisors to meet. Merlin attended the meeting and told Arthur that the kings he had defeated at Caerleon had found new supporters. "You must make allies with King Ban of Benwick and King Bors of Gaul. Send your messengers to France at once to secure allegiance from these kings," Merlin said. "They need your help for they are fighting King Claudius." Arthur chose as messengers the trusted Sir Ulfius and Sir Brastius. Their journey to Benwick was not untroubled. They met and defeated a number of King Claudius' supporters. Finally, they arrived at Benwick. Both King Ban and King Bors were at Benwick. They readily agreed to pledge themselves to Arthur's service. They gave Arthur's messengers gifts for the king and promised to travel to Britain to aid him. Arthur graciously received Ban and Bors. He called for a feast and tournament in their honor. The next day, he met with them to plan the attack. Merlin traveled to France to assemble the forces of the 2 worthy kings. 2 of Arthur's bravest knights went with Merlin. They remained in France to help the two kings' followers fight King Claudius. More than 10,000 men made their journey with Merlin from France to Britain. They arrived at Dover and then traveled to a forest in Benegrin. in the north. By the time that Merlin arrived in London, Arthur had gathered together his own impressive number of men, including Sir Ector and Sir Kay. Together with Merlin, Ban, and Bors, Arthur and his men went to Bedegraine Forest to prepare for the battle. The rebel kings had led the forces, 50,000 strong, close by Bedegraine Forest. As they approached the town, they attacked Bedegraine Castle, which was loyal to Arthur. Merlin advised Arthur to keep his men under cover in the forest. With Merlin's advice, Arthur could attack with fewer men. His enemies, who would not know that more men were hidden, ready for an ambush, would think Arthur was outnumbered. That night, Arthur took his bravest knights and attacked the rebel camp. By the time the other kings realized what was happening, Arthur and his men had killed or wounded many. When the fighting was over the next morning, the enemy forces were very seriously depleted. Then, as Merlin had advised, Arthur took 20,000 men into the open field to fight, leaving 10,000 in the forest. The rebel kings were delighted because they clearly outnumbered Arthur's forces, or so they thought. When the battle reached a fever pitch, Ban and Bors silently gave orders to the men in the forest. The rebel kings knew that their men were exhausted, as they were trying to decide how to proceed. Ban and Bors charged with their men. It seemed as though Arthur could not lose. Merlin knew better. As more and more men fell on both sides, Merlin told Arthur that he could not win this battle, and instructed him to lead his men to safety. Arthur did not doubt Merlin's wisdom, but it is a hard thing for a knight to leave a battle unfinished. Merlin reassured that the rebel kings were no longer a threat, since invaders had taken over their own lands. Arthur's enemies would have to use their forces to keep their kingdoms intact.